The Yokayo Ranch was actually 360 acres that was a Meta Foundation investment
Mm.
in Northern California, Ukiah. And it had on it the main ranch house, which was very old by his California standards, very old, not by most of the rest of the world. Um, and there's a lot of other things I could say about the history of the ranch or of Meta having the land or so on, but that's not the point. The point is that um, that ranch, that house, that main house,
Mm.
um, became the site that uh, I introduced. Not only we did the first Insight Dialogue retreat ever,
Mm.
but it was the first time at that the practice that I had been exploring with my PhD partner Terry O'Fallon um, was called Insight. I called it Insight Dialogue because I thought of the name on the way flying out to California. I lived in the East Coast at the time, and so it has kind of multiple layers of significance. Um, so on this trip, because there's this one residual little piece of that land that Meta Foundation still owns, very small thing, and just while I was there, I thought, oh, I'll just look at the house and walk around, which was fun. And it had been fixed up into a B&B and so on. People had more money than we ever did to do things to it. Um, and I was given free rein to walk all over the place. And I hadn't really been thinking about it because I was just like looking at it and saying, oh, they've done this. Oh, they've repaired that. Oh, they changed this. Um, but the next thing I know, I'm standing looking at this room,
Mm.
and it's like, wow, this is where the first Insight Dialogue retreat was. This is where the practice first had a name. Um, and from that retreat, which I'll tell you about in a moment, grew also the um, online practice group that
Mm.
for 2 years was the only form really that Insight Dialogue had. And so the four of us that were on that retreat were that group. So that was also the birth of what became the substance of my PhD dissertation. Uh, Terry and I did that together. And so, yeah, pretty rich. It was poignant. Okay, so at the time, I was teaching Vipassana. I was teaching traditional silent meditation. And it was through teaching meditation to Terry at the same time that she and I were both exploring dialogue in this PhD program. We had been studying David Bohm's form of dialogue and looking at what other people were doing. And we both naturally brought the meditation practice into our dialogue. It wasn't a plan, it was just something that was happening. And we commented on that together and began to do it intentionally and could feel that there was something going on here, something was bubbling here.
Mm.
Um, and we shared the practice with our other members of our PhD cohort. And, but that was really just getting going. And a number of my students wanted a retreat. So I agreed to teach a retreat. I said, there's a place we can do this without paying for a retreat center.
Mm.
And that was, of course, this empty house. And, someone who lived nearby catered it for us. And we all packed in. It was a very small retreat. I think there were 5 or 6 of us. And started our insight meditation retreat, our Vipassana retreat.
Mm-hmm.
Each afternoon, I made space for dialogue practice where I just introduced very generally some guidelines that Terry and I had been playing with, more like things like, I don't remember, but they were very general, like nothing like what you know of as insight dialogue. Just listen for what is any parallel thinking that you've got going on. I'd have to go back and look. I mean, it was very early. But even the pause, none of that. It was really just what David Bohm's thing was to pay attention to what's emergent in a shared consciousness. That was his interest. And we were combining that type of feeling, tone, or process with meditation. So there were no subgroups, no groups, no contemplations. It was just, okay, now we're starting. Whoever speaks, and continue with your mindfulness practice. That was pretty much it. So we, I ring a bell. Maybe I think I rang a bell. I don't even know. And we would sit there until someone had something to say, sort of like a Quaker meeting in that sense. A Quaker unprogrammed meeting. We would do that each afternoon for probably about an hour and a half, and then go back into silence. And then, of course, the rest of the night was silent. The rest of the next day was silent until the afternoon, and then we would do another hour and a half. And after about, I'm just going to guess, 4 or 5 days, I kind of, if I'm unkind to myself, I'd say I chickened out. It was like I really respected the power of traditional silent retreat. And I wanted these people to have whatever they could get of silent immersion. And I didn't yet know, therefore I couldn't trust where ID was going to go, what it was going to lead them. And these people, they might not get another retreat, or they might not get one for a long time, or I don't know, but I felt responsible. So we stopped. There was a surprisingly little disruption to the development of tranquility and steadiness of mind and mindfulness from the dialogue. And that had been a big concern of mine. So I was surprised and really pleased. I was encouraged. It's like, wow, I thought it would rattle my mind or rattle their minds. But no, people had good or productive silent retreat. And the insight dialogue, I can't say that it did or didn't have any big impact on them. Not that I recall, honestly. But just the fact that it was not disruptive seemed pretty big at that time to me. There were 4 of us on that retreat, me teaching it, of course, Terry, who was my partner in the work, and a guy named Gary Steinberg, and a woman named Polly Van Hall. They were both studying with me on the East Coast. who continued on for this online group where we would meet in AOL chat rooms and do insight dialogue via text. So real-time chat rooms, text chat rooms, not verbal or anything. Very primitive, but if you bring sati and samadhi to almost anything, something's going to happen, right? And that's what we were discovering. One of the kind of really sweet things about the PhD partnership that Terry and I had was we were both really intense. And so once we started working on this and getting a sense through these AOL chat rooms of like how the mind could really, really come into just a simple line of text and then pause and really reread it and immerse in it and then feel the fingers typing and, like moment by moment sati practice, mindfulness practice. And then the sense of relatedness just through the language, even though we knew language was conceptual and empty. It was really quite something. And we wouldn't have gotten at that if we weren't both pretty energetic and persistent in our inquiry. So I wouldn't call it just a casual friendship. I would call it like something really, there was a spark of practice that we felt we were looking after. Now, the fact that came just from the simple, as I believe, from the seed of bringing the meditative quality of mindfulness primarily and some samadhi together with something of the power of relationship, because remember, it was just through text, but still, that's people creating text and the mind gathering around that. That was a very bare bones, but from where I sit now, it kind of tells me, wow, there's the synergy between meditative qualities and just something of the aliveness of two or more people. It's quite something. Didn't look anything like what Insight Dialogue looks to anybody now. I think you got that. And the guidelines took years later that I started sharing the practice myself in small groups in Portland, Oregon, then started to teach. The first ID retreat for the public was in Barre, Massachusetts in 1999. And then from there, it started rolling out. So over the next few years, the form of the guidelines as you know it basically emerged. And then subgroups started. I started to introduce subgroups and contemplations, and then from there it ripened. What you would recognize if you were just say looking over my shoulder and you just saw me staring at AOL chat text, you know what I mean? And you're sitting there, it's like, what is Greg doing? It's like, well, he's a pretty intense guy, but like, this is kind of crazy, But if you really looked, you would see that I was focused. I was attentive. There was some peacefulness, but I would say the energy factor was stronger than the tranquility factor for sure. And investigation that factor was quite strong. And when you would see someone else put text like Gary or Polly or Terry would say something, so you would get a sense that, oh, there's other people there, right? You would get that sense. It's hard for me to say if you would have been able to link it to, like, if you saw an insight dialogue retreat now and somehow you could separate, and then you happen to see this other thing, would you say that looks like the origin of this or connected to this? I just can't say. But in my heart, in my mind, absolutely, kind of that touch of mindfulness in relationship, even just through text. Be patient. Trust that this will find its way. Yeah. I had the natural tendency to persevere. That's just my nature. In my, as a composer and performer, I've persevered on projects for longer than anyone would make any sense of, in relationships. And I kind of got from my dad a quality of, whether or not people approve or like what you do what you believe in, or what feels right, or sort of like trust yourself, trust your judgment. So I wouldn't need to tell myself, hey there, Greg, stay at it, because I was going to do that anyway. I did do that through literally decades of having the work not really respected or accepted or whatever. But behind it, there was some impatience or some dislike of how things were going. I wanted to share something that I thought was really beautiful, and I felt like I was crying in the wilderness, as it were. So something just to bring that more intense young Gregory a little bit of peace and happiness, and yeah. I mean, the audacity of my naming this thing Insight Dialogue, which I told you I did literally on the way to this retreat. The word insight, really, Greg? Because I'm a pretty conservative guy in many ways, and I really respect that word insight. But I meant it. So there was a kind of a trust in an efficacy that I didn't yet really understand. I'd want that Greg to be inspired by the qualities of awareness, the qualities of a completely non-personalized metta and compassion. I want him to know about the joy, the good that it's brought to people. I was still pretty close in those days to my science-y self.
Mm.
So out of kindness to that Greg, I might speak in that language too.
Mm.
I might speak about interpersonal or social psychology,
Mm.
but at the time, a lot of the research that's evolved on social neuroscience, on social evolution of the human race, those things, those theories, and those practices, and those um, kind of structures of body mind weren't understood at that time. There were, of
Mm.
course, some things that were, but a lot of what we now know to be true about human relatedness, we didn't know then.
Mm.
Science didn't know. I mean,
Mm.
of course, the ancient traditions and the mothers and babies knew,
Mm.
but they didn't know it conceptually like the scientists do. They just
Mm.
felt it and lived by it. So I think that's about it. I don't know what else I would say in the way of describing it.
Mm. Mm.
Oh, you know what? I would also probably point out to him that the way the seed of relational contact that's unfettered by ignorance and the constructing processes that disturb the heart, the way that migrates through a community.
Mm.
eh, I would want to point that out to him as well, because it's such a beautiful and inspiring um, dynamic. I feel a lot of gratitude
Mm.
to my partners in the work, um, especially the core group of Terry and Gary and Polly. Without all of them having such an intense commitment,
Mm.
um, it wouldn't have been the seedbed that it was
Mm.
for the dissertation, you know, but also kind of in a way it helped launch my sense of this is something I'm really committing myself to going forward. I didn't make that, I just was committed to it. I didn't say, oh, I'm going to commit to this. I didn't have to do that. But their full involvement
Mm.
was crucial, right? They were all partners in this.